Have you ever felt like someone loved the idea of you more than they ever tried to understand the truth of you? Like you were cast as the healthy one, the emotionally intelligent one, the green flag, not because they truly saw you, but because it made them look better just standing beside you? If you've ever been admired instead of loved, praised instead of protected, used as proof of someone else's growth while quietly shrinking in the background, then this story was written for you. He wasn't supposed to be there. That was the first thread that should have tugged at my caution, but instead, it wrapped itself around my curiosity. The sign-up sheet didn't have his name. I checked twice. He said he was just there to support a friend, though no friend ever appeared. When the folding chairs creaked beneath us and the room shifted from polite intros to stories with teeth, I felt the usual prickle crawl up my spine. Not fear, just the quiet stretch of vulnerability, like bearing a wound in front of strangers and praying no one winces. I didn't plan to share, not really. But the words came like they always did, hesitant, then rushing. I spoke about the anxiety that stalked me even on calm days, about what it felt like to always be the one doing the emotional heavy lifting. I didn't cry. I never do in groups. But my voice cracked on the word worth, and I felt my throat clench around the rest. That's when he spoke. Right in the middle of my pause. "Not to interrupt," he said, leaning forward with that soft, earnest look people use when they want to be seen as safe. "But you speak like someone who's fought hard for her peace." The room offered polite chuckles. I smiled, half out of embarrassment, half out of something else I couldn't name then. It wasn't the compliment that hit. It was the accuracy, like he'd seen the scar beneath the makeup and didn't flinch. I should have known that being seen and being studied are not the same. He didn't speak again that session, just listened, eyes warm, nodding slightly like he already knew the weight of my words before I said them. And when we stood for the awkward circle goodbye, he didn't linger, just a nod, a smile, like a promise tucked inside restraint. The message came 2 days later. "Hey, not sure if this is weird, but I really admired the way you held space for yourself the other day. It felt intentional, safe. Just wanted to say that. Intentional, safe. Two of my own favorite words. Words I'd used in therapy. Words I used to soothe my younger self when her hands wouldn't stop shaking. That was the beginning. What followed felt like a montage I didn't know I was inside of. Long conversations that blurred past midnight. Messages that mirrored my cadence exactly. I'd say something like, "I'm trying to stay soft even when it feels foolish." And he'd respond with, "Softness isn't foolish. It's a form of quiet armor." Quiet armor. As if he could read the title of the playlist I listened to while walking home from therapy. He made one called Soft Armor 2 days later. All acoustic, no lyrics too heavy. He said he didn't want anything that distracted from my peace. He showed up with turmeric tea the week I got a migraine so bad I couldn't open my eyes. He knew the exact temperature to steep it at. He asked about my childhood and didn't flinch when I hesitated. Said, "Only share what your inner child can handle right now." That line, so specific, so fluent. He met my roommates by the end of that week, played board games with them, was charming, helpful, never tried to dominate the conversation. He offered to water my plants when I forgot, replied to my texts like he was waiting on every word. By the end of the second week, he called his mother while I was over and said, "You've got to meet her. She's the first person I've ever dated who feels like safety." He was smooth, but not the kind of smooth that sets off alarms, the kind that calms them down. It felt like I was being handled. Not harmed, not manipulated, just studied, reflected, admired, like a painting someone wanted to hang in their favorite room. Still, something about how easily he matched me made me pause. One night, I tried to ask, gently, if he'd done a lot of inner work. He laughed. "Too much," he said. "I used to be a walking trauma response. I had to unlearn everything." Then he looked at me like I was part of the solution, like I was what came after his chaos. That should have comforted me. But somewhere deep inside, a voice I'd learned to ignore whispered, if he healed alone, Why does he still need a mirror? I pushed it down. After all, wasn't this what healing was supposed to look like? Slow walks, deep talks, a man who remembered my coffee order and didn't roll his eyes when I mentioned reparenting work? Wasn't this the right kind of love? Still, I found myself replaying that moment from the circle. The way he interrupted, not with aggression, but with calculation. Like he knew exactly what would sound safe, admired, familiar. Like I wasn't a person unraveling, I was a prompt in a script. I remember sitting by the window a few nights later, phone warm in my hand from our long calls, the teacup still half full, steam fading. He'd just texted, "You make me want to be more whole," and I had smiled. But the smile didn't reach the part of me that knew how asyly words can dress up hunger. That night, as I turned off my lamp and pulled the blanket up to my chin, a single thought hovered between the dark and the stillness. It didn't feel like falling in love. It felt like being chosen. And I wasn't sure if that was better or worse. That's when I should have known. But I wasn't a red flag yet. Just a green one waving, hoping the breeze was real. It was at his friend Leo's birthday dinner, the first time I saw myself from the outside. A long table draped in black linen, scattered candles flickering like they knew secrets we didn't. The kind of trendy tapas place where everyone orders 4 things and pretends they're full. He squeezed my hand as we approached, murmuring, "They're gonna love you." And for some reason, I felt that low ripple of pressure, the kind that hums beneath a compliment. Not because I doubted I'd be liked, but because I'd started to notice how much he needed me to be likable. We slid into seats at the center. I offered polite hellos, light jokes, asked questions that made people feel interesting. It's a skill, one I honed in therapy, one I don't use lightly. And I could feel it working. The eyes that lingered, the nods, the warm laughter that followed my calm delivery. Soothing, effortless, exactly what he liked to display. Then came the toast. Leo had just opened his gift, some sleek black headphones, and people were clinking glasses, loose with sangria and early affection. That's when he stood up. "Before dessert hits," he said, swaying slightly in performative charm, "I just want to say how grateful I am to this group, and also..." He turned to me, hand on my shoulder. "To her." He looked around. "She's my green flag." The table laughed, not mockingly, just lightly, like the kind of laugh you give when something sounds like a punchline and a compliment. I smiled too, blinking slower than usual. He wasn't done. "She's the emotionally intelligent one," he went on. "I used to be a disaster, like total mess, but she's a therapist in heels." More laughter. "Compared to the messes I dated before, this one's a damn upgrade." My laugh came late. That kind of soft, self-deprecating exhale you release when your body isn't sure what else to do. I remember looking at my wine glass, the red light catching on the curve. I remember thinking, he just reduced me to a product upgrade, a feature set. The conversation rolled forward, a joke about dating apps, someone teasing someone else for always falling for yoga instructors. But I stayed behind. Somewhere in that sentence he'd said, "Green flag, therapist in heels," compared to the messes before. It should have made me feel proud, except it felt like I was being narrated. Like I was no longer a participant in this relationship, but a character in a testimonial, an evidence slide. And from that night on, the label stuck. His friends started calling me the upgrade. One even messaged me after the dinner, "You're the reset he needed. You glow different." They meant well, I think. But every message felt like another glass box being slid over my head. Even in small gatherings I noticed it, the stories he told. She helped me understand emotional reactivity. Or, she's the one who got me into journaling. We journal together. We didn't, not really. And then he'd laugh. "She's a better person than I'll ever be." At first, I smiled. But over time, the smile strained. Because behind every compliment was a dissection. Every praise, a pinning. They weren't loving me. They were loving the version of themselves that I allowed them to imagine. I was the prize that made them feel like better men for being adjacent. I remember the moment it all clicked. It was a week after that dinner. I'd had a nightmare, something visceral, old, rooted in real pain. I woke up shaking, silent tears streaming, trying not to wake him. But he stirred, asked what was wrong. I told him I couldn't talk yet, just needed to be held. He did, for a moment, then fell asleep again. 2 days later, I overheard him on a call with a friend, casual, laughing. Yeah, she had a breakdown the other night, but in a really grounded way. She's so evolved. And just like that, my grief became proof of his compatibility. It wasn't malice, that's what made it worse. It was branding. He didn't want me messy or tired or disappointed. He wanted me wise, digestible, strong, but only in curated doses, vulnerable but photogenic, a green flag that flapped in all the right winds. I began to measure my own silences, not to keep peace, but to track how often I was performing it. I started wondering how many of my smiles were real, and how many were rehearsed for the people watching us. And there were always people watching. At brunches, I was introduced as the one who taught him empathy. At gatherings, I was asked for relationship advice, on his cue. Like a panelist in a success story I didn't agree to star in. I felt my autonomy blur at the edges, my story being repurposed for his applause. The worst part? I had trained him to speak the language of healing, and now it was being used like decoration, quotes without cost, terms without truth. One night, I stared into the mirror longer than usual, tried to find the girl he kept describing, the unflinching, evolved emotional powerhouse, the one who never raised her voice, never needed too much. She wasn't there. What I saw instead was someone slowly suffocating inside a compliment too big to wear. A girl who wanted to scream but didn't because screaming wasn't emotionally aware. And I realized I had stopped being a person. I had become a brand extension. A trophy he could point to and say, "See, I healed. Look who I have now." Only, I wasn't his healing. I was his mask. And the more I let it slip, the more I started remembering what I looked like before I let myself become the proof. At some point, I stopped existing in the room and started existing in the script he'd written for me. It was subtle, like a filter slowly sliding over every conversation. I'd speak, and he'd summarize. I'd explain a thought, and he'd translate it into something more digestible for others. Always smiling, always charming. But beneath the smile, I could hear the rehearsal. "She's the one who taught me presence," he'd say, while cutting me off mid-sentence to finish my thought in a way that sounded nobler than what I actually meant. "Her boundaries taught me how to love better," he'd tell his friends, right after ignoring the one I'd set 10 minutes ago. At first, I told myself it was pride, that he admired me so much he couldn't help but reflect it back to the world. But admiration, I learned, isn't the same as respect. Admiration is still projection. It's about how you make them feel, not how they make room for who you are. The shift came during scene. A casual gathering at his apartment. Nothing special, just a few friends from his grad program. Someone brought wine, someone else brought store-bought hummus and called it homemade. I was telling a story about a recent client meeting that had gone sideways, lighthearted, not trauma, but layered with nuance. He interrupted me. Not harshly, not rudely, just cleanly, with that same polished energy he always used when talking over me. "Babe's great with conflict," he said, laughing as he nudged my leg under the table. "She diffuses tension like she's got a degree in peacemaking." The group chuckled. I smiled, automatically. My stomach didn't. Later, in the kitchen, just the two of us and a bowl of nearly untouched guac, I said gently, "Hey, could you try not to talk over me when I'm sharing something, especially around people?" He looked up from slicing limes for mocktails, smiled. That smile, the one lined with marketing polish. "That's not like you," he said softly. "You're the green flag, remember? You don't do reactive stuff." It was so absurd, so perfectly scripted, I actually paused to see if a camera would pan to my face. He didn't mean it maliciously. That's what made it worse. He genuinely believed it was a compliment, as if reminding me of my brand identity would soothe me into submission, as if the title of Green Flag came with behavioral guidelines I'd agreed to. And I realized then, he didn't know me. He knew the role. He had memorized the language of care, not the act. Every phrase he used, emotional labor, holding space, active listening, had become currency. Not because he embodied them, but because he knew they sounded evolved. His love was a TED Talk, not a tender place. I had become a script that validated his progress, a walking badge of honor that made him look like a man who had done the work. That night, I didn't correct him. I didn't explain. I didn't cry. I just watched. Something shifted in me, clicked into place with cold clarity. I stopped feeling hurt and started collecting data. The next week, I started paying attention not to what he said, but how he said it. His compliments became easier to decode, praise wrapped around performance. "You're so grounded," he'd say when I didn't react to his forgetfulness. "You're so patient," when I accommodated his lateness. Each sentence held a subtext. "You're valuable when you stay within this script." I wondered how many other women he'd rehearsed on, how many times he'd tested which compliments disarmed, which apologies bought him time, which phrases made him seem emotionally fluent. He was fluent, all right. But fluency isn't the same as comprehension, and comprehension isn't the same as care. One evening, he invited me to a panel he was co-hosting on emotional literacy in modern relationships. I sat in the front row, smiling like a proud partner, nodding along as he talked about mutual holding and trauma-informed love. And I kept thinking, he has no idea what my mother's voice sounds like when she's angry. He's never asked. He could recite 10 ways to regulate emotional spirals, but didn't know that when I go silent, it means I'm trying not to shatter. I became a case study of my own relationship, watched him the way scientists observe animals in enclosed habitats. I noticed how he modulated his tone depending on who was watching, how he always looked toward me when using terms like vulnerability, as if saying, "Look, see, I'm applying it. I'm the man who gets it." But nothing was landing. Not really, not beneath the surface. Because every I moved slightly out of character, got quiet when I should have been gracious, set a boundary when I was expected to be chill. He treated it like a glitch in his programming, like the product he ordered was malfunctioning. The more I studied him, the clearer it became. He didn't fall in love with me. He fell in love with the mirror I held up. And when the mirror began reflecting back his own blind spots, he didn't ask why. He asked what was wrong with the mirror. I remember staring at him one night as he recited some quote about co-regulation from a book I'd recommended months ago, unread by him, and thinking, he's not cruel, he's curated, and I was curated too. I'd let myself be filed down to fit the mold, because at first, it felt nice to be adored, to be seen as wise, evolved, safe. But safety without truth isn't peace. It's prison dressed up in silk. And in that prison, I had been smiling too much. Smiling like it was the only language I had left. Smiling like a script. It happened at Theo's rooftop dinner party. String lights swaying gently overhead, wine glasses sweating in the late summer heat, and everyone trying too hard to sound effortlessly intelligent. The kind of evening where buzzwords floated like smoke, and everyone took turns pretending they weren't performing. He was on again. One hand on my lower back, the other gesturing mid-sentence, filling the space with his curated charm. "We've been working on conscious conflict," he said, like we were co-authors in a self-help book. "She's incredible at reflective listening." I had said exactly 7 words all night, and yet I was everywhere in his sentences. Then, mid-discussion about someone's breakup, I finally spoke. "Sometimes it's not about how fast you recover," I said, "but how honest you are about why it hurt in the first place." He cut in, lightly but sharply. "That's what I've been trying to teach her. She used to internalize everything. Now she's so much more grounded." It was a clean interruption, smooth, the kind no one at the table would register as dominance, but I felt the sting behind my teeth anyway. A tight heat bloomed at the base of my throat. I let the silence sit. Then I smiled, sweetly, softly, like sugar right before it scorches. Sometimes the mask slips, huh? His fork paused mid-air. Around the table, glasses lowered. Eyes flicked down to plates. The kind of silence that only happens when truth walks in without knocking. He let out a short laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. What's that supposed to mean? I tilted my head slightly. Nothing. Just saying it's easy to rehearse emotional fluency. The messy part's harder to perform. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else reached for the hummus like it could save them. He didn't speak again for the rest of dinner. Later that week, it happened again. This time at Jamie and Lila's apartment, a smaller crowd. Someone had just made a joke about him being a walking green flag now, and there it was again, that moment where I could have let the narrative pass. But I didn't. I smiled, looked over, and said calmly, "He knows the terms, the practice parts, in progress." It was a soft sentence, deliberate, surgical. His face didn't move right away, but his jaw ticked, just once. Jamie blinked. Lila looked down. The conversation stumbled forward like a chair with one short leg. He didn't say a word until we got to his car. It was one of those late summer nights where the air felt too thick to breathe, streetlights casting long shadows across dashboards. I rolled down the window halfway, let the silence wrap around us. And then, "What are you trying to prove?" I turned slowly, met his eyes. "Nothing," I said. "Just being real. Isn't that your brand?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "You're trying to make me look bad." "I'm not trying anything," I replied, voice calm as water over glass. "Maybe I just stopped protecting the image you liked better." He stared at me like I'd cracked something open. And maybe I had. Because for so long, I'd been the mirror he could polish himself against, the emotionally literate partner, the muse of his healing arc. But mirrors don't owe you flattery, and sometimes when the light shifts, they show you what you didn't want to see. I watched him try to decide what expression to wear next. Anger didn't suit him. It clashed with his whole aesthetic. Hurt? Maybe. But that required vulnerability, and his version of it always came with rehearsal time. So he settled for silence. The drive back was quiet, save for the soft hum of tires and the occasional turn signal blinking like a pulse trying to stay steady. I leaned my head against the window, eyes tracing the lines of the city. And inside my mind, I started stacking cards. Every phrase, every false performance, every time he turned me into a backdrop. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I had stopped being afraid of breaking the script, and that was more dangerous than any raised voice. Because when a woman like me gets quiet, not submissive but strategic, the unraveling doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence that reveals everything words once concealed. He still didn't know how much of the story I had taken back. He still thought this was a phase, a mood. But I had already shifted. I wasn't the proof anymore. I was the witness, and I was done clapping for the performance. I never announced rebellion. I simply stopped color-matching my life to his. The first night it showed was trivial on the surface. Theo's game night potluck, another stage for his curated charisma. He wore the sage green sweater that once matched my midi dress so perfectly, strangers called us palette soulmates. I arrived 10 minutes late in ink black linen, hair twisted up, lips lacquered the color of ripe plums. The contrast made a few heads tilt. He tried to catch my hand for the familiar entrance pose. I kept both palms wrapped around a casserole dish and breezed past to the kitchen. A small rip in the backdrop, but he felt the draft. He pressed in beside me while I sprinkled chives, voice hushed. "No kiss, hello?" I smiled politely at the knife. "Hands are occupied." The evening rolled on. I laughed at jokes that deserved it, fell silent when stories recycled themselves, and offered precisely 0 prompts for him to brag about our meditation ritual. When he steered conversation toward our journaling practice, I let the words hang like fog until Zoe, ever the extrovert, asked, "So how's the daily pages going?" I took a sip of seltzer, felt the fizz sting my throat, and said evenly, "He journaled twice. Growth doesn't work well in bullet points." A low ripple of laughter, half amusement, half confusion. His smile froze before rebooting into something thinner. But I saw it, the first crack traveling across his veneer. After that, my refusals multiplied in microscopic ways. I no longer carried turmeric tea packets in my tote just in case. I stopped finishing his sentences with the poetic flourish he adored. If he forgot a date from my past, I waited for the silence to embarrass him rather than supplying that answer. Strategic disobedience, quiet as snowfall, cold enough to linger. One afternoon at Lila's balcony brunch, he recounted my panic attack story, except he dressed it in gentle metaphors and heroic self-reflection. "She was trembling like a storm-shaken tree," he intoned, "and I just held space." "Actually," I interjected, voice low but blade sharp, "that's not how it happened." Fork tines tapped plates. I met every eye at the table. "I asked you for silence and you filled it with advice," I calmed myself. My tone wasn't angry. Anger would have been a gift. It was factual, unadorned. Evidence. He cleared his throat, tried to laugh it off. No one joined him. The wind shifted. The story died. Small omissions followed. I skipped his colleague's charity gala, sent my regrets, citing migraine but enjoying popcorn and a crime documentary in bed. Where once I would have texted affirmations before his big presentation, I sent a single line. "Good luck, you know your stuff. Support, stripped of worship." Symbolic gestures unraveled too. The playlist Soft Armor vanished from my shared library. The potted fern he loved, the one I watered weekly, browned quietly on the sill. When he pointed it out, I just nodded. Plants need consistent care. He noticed? Oh, he noticed. Admiration was the currency that purchased his illusion. Now the market crashed. One late evening, as moonlight sketched silver bars across our bedroom, he stared at me like I was a puzzle missing its edge pieces. "Are you mad at me?" "No," I said truthfully. "I'm just opting out of the PR department." "I don't need PR." "Then why does honesty feel like sabotage?" He had no reply, only soft exhalations that fogged in the cold room. Inside my mind, a running ledger recorded every overlooked courtesy I once performed, smoothing his conversational missteps, translating his half-formed empathy for friends, laughing one beat sooner so jokes landed. I hadn't realized how exhausting the choreography was until I stopped dancing. Without me patching the holes, his persona clattered like stage props in a sudden gust. Yet I felt lighter, gravity rewired, bones buoyant. Each non-compliance stitched new skin over the places he'd branded green. Freedom hummed under my ribs, a low electric promise. One Saturday, we attended Nora's engagement brunch. Past me would have worn floral pastels and curled close to his side. Present me chose a crimson slip dress under a charcoal blazer, red flag shades, deliberate. When he reached for my hand during toasts, I sipped espresso instead, letting his fingers close on air. The gesture was small enough to be deniable, potent enough to unsettle. I saw him glance at the vacant space between us, like it was widening into canyon. Conversation pivoted toward couple routines. Someone asked about our daily gratitude swap. He began, "We still do it, right, babe?" I met his hopeful gaze, then addressed the table. We paused. Authenticity shouldn't be homework, you know? A few guests nodded, contemplative. He swallowed, throat bobbing. Driving home, the silence roared. Streetlights flickered over the windshield like interrogation, lamps. Finally, he murmured, "You're different lately." "I'm original lately," I corrected. "I feel like you're pulling away." "I'm just standing still. Maybe you were the one pushing." A beat. 2. What happened to us? I rested my forehead against the cool window glass, watched city lights smear into molten gold. Us had always been a two-man play performed by one actor and one prop. The prop had walked off stage, the actor was fumbling for lines. "I didn't sabotage you," I whispered, more to myself than him. I just stopped cleaning up your messes. The car absorbed the confession, tires humming a steady lullaby of consequences. He gripped the wheel harder, knuckles pale. In the side mirror, I saw downtown recede, steel and glass shrinking like an empire built on clever reflections, dissolving without its mirror. Thread by thread, the curtain was coming down, and beneath it, someone else, someone unscripted, unbranded, was learning how to breathe in the open air. The flyer said, "Redefining Healthy Masculinity, a panel for the new age of partnership." Bold font, neutral colors, subtle serif, the kind of branding that says, "I'm not like other men, I read bell hooks once." I didn't plan to attend, at least not at first. But then he sent the link. "Would love to have your support," he texted. "You've shaped so much of what I'll be saying." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. There it was again, that subtle positioning. Not, "I'd like your perspective," not, "I'd love your voice," but, "Come validate the version of me I rehearsed in your image." So I put on my softest dress. Not for him, for the irony. Blush-toned, with long sleeves and tiny shell buttons. I wanted to look like the memory he was about to misquote. I wanted to sit like a question mark in the front row and make him nervous. The auditorium was modest. Folding chairs, filtered light, someone arranging kombucha bottles on a side table like they were centerpieces. I sat directly in front of the podium. He caught sight of me mid-soundcheck, hesitated, smiled, but it didn't reach the edges. There were 3 panelists. One was a therapist, another a community organizer, and then him, introduced as a relationship wellness advocate and content creator. I almost laughed. He once told me intimacy was too complicated to schedule. Now he was booking it by the hour. He started his segment like he always did, with practiced humility. "I used to think emotional control was power," he said, "but then I met someone who challenged that, who taught me to sit in discomfort and not flinch. She's here tonight, actually." He looked at me, held the gaze. "And she's the green flag that made all of this possible." Applause. I didn't clap. I crossed one leg over the other and tilted my head like I was admiring a painting that felt off. He went on. "Stories about our relationship. IP, edited, polished, curated. My patience became his arc. My trauma became his catalyst. Every time I held him during his insecurities, he turned it into a parable about becoming a better man. Every time I fell silent during conflict, he called it sacred space." And the audience nodded, moved. They believed him. Of course they did. His voice held that warmth that suggested growth. He wasn't cruel. He was clever. And clever men know how to sell tenderness they haven't earned. Then came the QA. A woman in the back asked, "How did you begin your emotional literacy journey?" He smiled like he'd been waiting for it. "My partner," he said. "She reminded me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that conflict isn't a threat, it's a mirror." He looked at me again, soft and almost reverent, and I raised my hand. The room stilled. The moderator laughed a little, unsure if it was a bit. "Looks like we have a question from the source herself." He handed me the mic. I took it gently, felt the weight of it settle in my palm like a truth I'd been holding too long. I didn't look at him. I looked at the audience. "When he says I taught him vulnerability," I began, voice clear, "what he means is, I sat through moments he didn't have the tools to name. I absorbed confusion. I softened the sharpness. I let silence fill in the words he wouldn't say." A pause. "But what he won't say, because it doesn't fit the arc, is that he rehearsed that vulnerability in private, practiced the terms, memorized the lines, and when things got messy, when I needed the same grace, I was met with silence, or worse, with performance." You could hear the oxygen shift in the room, the kind of stillness that doesn't breathe. He was frozen. I went on. "Some of us get tired of being the backdrop to someone else's evolution, of being the muse, the mirror, the moral compass. We get tired of being called the green flag while bleeding quietly off stage. Growth sounds noble on paper, but real growth means showing up when no one's watching." The moderator reached for the mic, but I wasn't done. "I'm not angry," I added softly. I just stopped participating in a narrative that only had one hero. And I realized, if I'm always the mirror, no one ever asks what I see. Then I handed it back. His face was blank, like a script he hadn't prepared for, like a mask that had finally cracked. And now, he wasn't sure what expression to wear. He didn't respond. There was nothing to say, nothing to defend without exposing how much of it had been memorized. The panel ended 5 minutes early. People trickled out quietly. One woman touched my shoulder, whispered, "Thank you." Another simply nodded with glassy eyes. No one looked at him, not directly. He didn't text me that night. For the first time in our shared history, he had no words to fix the silence. But I did. I walked out of that room not triumphant, but clear. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need applause. All I needed was for the truth to echo louder than the performance, and for once, it did. 2 days of silence passed like glass settling after a shatter. Not a word from him, no quote-laced apologies, no half-baked voice notes with strategically spaced sighs, nothing. I imagined him sitting at his desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard trying to stitch a narrative out of what couldn't be reframed. Then the message came. "You made me look like a fraud. No greeting, no punctuation even. Just that sentence, like a wound he thought I should feel responsible for." I didn't flinch. I let the screen glow for a full minute before typing. "I didn't make you anything. I stopped translating you." Then I put my phone down and went back to steeping my tea. I thought that would be the end. But of course it never is. Not when someone's myth begins to collapse and the audience gets confused about who was wearing the crown. The first message came from Jamie, neutral, testing the waters. "Hey, saw the panel. That was intense. You okay?" Then Lila. "You were brave, but I didn't know it was that bad. He always spoke so highly of you." And then the ones who didn't mask the discomfort. "I get that you were hurt, but did it have to be so public?" I replied to each with the same line, copied and pasted like a quiet chorus. Green flags still bleed when waved too long. Some left it at that. Others tried to reframe what they saw, as if I needed help softening it, as if the truth could be too sharp unless sanded down by someone else's misunderstanding. But I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain or elaborate. For once, I let people sit with the discomfort he used to hand me like a shared pillow. There was power in that silence, not the kind that screams, but the kind that holds eye contact when someone's lying and says nothing, because nothing more needs to be said. I started noticing the little things unravel around him. His healing page, once a constant stream of carousel posts, story polls, carefully captioned photos of sunsets and journal prompts, went dormant. Last post, the panel flyer, nothing since. His audience, which once adored the narrative of redemption wrapped in aesthetics, had grown quiet too. No comments, no new collaborations, no reposts of his curated growth arcs. I passed by his favorite cafe one afternoon, the one he swore had the best ethically sourced pour-over in the city. I hadn't planned on it. It just happened. My errands curved me toward it like fate tracing a final loop. And there he was, inside, hunched over a laptop, hands motionless on the keyboard, staring down like the words were lost. He looked older, not in years, but in energy. Like someone whose stage lights had gone out and didn't know how to speak without a script. He looked up. I kept walking. I didn't speed up, didn't glance back, just walked past, spine straight, breath even, letting the silence stretch long enough for him to know I'd seen him, and chosen not to stop. Because I was done performing, done being the muse who fixed the lighting while he stole the spotlight, done translating his silences into softness. There was something sacred about that kind of exit. Not loud, not cruel, just final. He used to say my presence was grounding, that I was the calm in his storm, the anchor in his emotional ocean. But I wasn't an anchor. I was a warning, and he didn't hear it until the waves hit. That night, I lit a candle on my desk, not for him, for me, for the version of myself I'd buried in compromise, The one who used to walk on eggshells so carefully she forgot how heavy her own footsteps sounded. I sat there with a journal, pen hovering, unsure what to write. Then I smiled. Because for the first time in months, the words I needed weren't his. They weren't even for him. They were mine. I didn't burr and him down. I didn't scream, cheat, or lie. I just stepped sideways, and that was enough. Because sometimes you don't have to destroy someone to reveal them. You just have to stop standing in their light and let the shadow fall where it always should have been. There was no dramatic ending, no final phone call, no confrontation on a rainy street corner with trembling hands and desperate pleas. He didn't show up at my door with apologies rehearsed and eyes wet with revelation. That kind of closure only exists in stories that still believe men like him can be fixed if you just love hard enough. I had loved quietly, too quietly, and that's what gave him the room to curate. Now, I moved with intention, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. I began with small rituals, not the performative ones, the ones that stitched the edges of me back together. I opened my music app and scrolled to the playlist he made for me in the beginning, Soft Armor. The name once made me feel seen. Now it felt like a lie in lowercase cursive. Songs that once felt like warmth now felt like waiting rooms. I deleted it without hesitation. A single press, a breath, gone. Then I cleaned my room, not for aesthetic, but for space. I stripped the bedding we used to curl into, folded away the hoodie he left behind, tossed the tea packets he once claimed helped him feel aligned. They didn't. They just made him look aligned. That night, I sat by the window. The city outside hummed with soft, distant life. Not loud enough to drown anything, just enough to remind me I was no longer performing. I opened my journal. Not the shared one, not the bullet point, daily reflections we once pretended were mutual growth. This one was mine. The spine cracked softly as I flipped to a blank page. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't write to be profound. I didn't write like someone might read it. I just wrote. Messy, looping sentences, incomplete thoughts, rage, relief, stillness, lines that spiraled into themselves and back out again. I wrote the truth. And in that chaos, I found myself again. Not the green flag, not the trophy, not the emotional translator he turned me into. Just me. I remembered the girl who used to cry and not apologize for it. The one who loved fiercely without narrating it like a podcast. The one who used to walk into rooms without adjusting her tone for someone else's comfort. She wasn't gone. She had just gone quiet, drowned under someone else's storyline. Now, she was loud in all the ways that mattered, not in volume, in presence. And slowly, the world responded. Friends stopped asking if we were still together. They knew. Some reached out with curiosity, others with silence. I didn't chase either. I answered questions only when they were real, and even then, I kept my responses simple. He called me his green flag, and I waved. Not as surrender, as warning. There's a certain haunting power in walking away with grace. People don't know what to do with it. They expect rage or collapse, but silence, that earned silence, forces them to listen. He never replied to my final text. I didn't need him to. The silence between us wasn't absence, it was evidence. Evidence that the version of him that existed only when I was soft enough to cushion it couldn't stand with but me. And I had stepped aside, not to hurt him, not even to teach him, but to reclaim what was never his to curate. Me. In the months that followed, he posted a few half-hearted quotes on his story. Nothing original, just vague phrases about healing being messy and the danger of expectations. But there were no photos, no panels, no smiling videos about emotional awareness. He'd lost his mirror. And I had found mine. It didn't reflect him anymore. It reflected a woman who walked through someone else's performance and emerged unscripted. Not soft like armor, just soft, and sharp, and whole. As I closed the journal that night, I looked out the window again. Not for signs, not for closure. just for proof that the world kept spinning even when I stopped clinging to someone who mistook me for a stage light. The sky was dark, the room was quiet, and for the first time, the silence didn't ache. It belonged to me. Stillness, not chaos, was the final act. And in that stillness, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. Some people won't lie outright. They'll just misuse your light. And the most haunting kind of manipulation is the one dressed in compliments, in curated admiration, in a carefully practiced good man mask that crumbles when you stop translating them. But here's the truth. You don't owe anyone your image. You don't exist to make someone else's healing look believable. You are not a mirror. You are the whole damn flame. So tell me, have you ever been someone's green flag and felt yourself waving just to be seen? Drop your story in the comments, because this space is yours now. And if this felt personal, that's because it was. Hit the like button if this spoke to something you've lived. Subscribe for more stories that say the things no one said when you needed to hear them most.